The shot of a Winchester rifle echoed across the dusty plains of Colorado Territory in the autumn of 1878, startling a flock of birds into flight as Wade Bennett squinted through the morning haze at his target. He lowered his rifle with satisfaction, the tin can he'd set up now sporting a clean hole through its center. This quiet morning ritual was part of what kept him sane in the solitude of his ranch 10 miles outside Leadville, a booming silver mining town nestled high in the Rocky Mountains. Wade holstered his weapon and turned back toward his modest homestead, a sturdy 2-story cabin he'd built with his own hands over the past 3 years. At 32, he'd carved out a respectable life for himself, transforming the barren plot of land into a small but thriving cattle ranch. His days followed the predictable rhythm of ranch work, tending to his growing herd, mending fences, and occasionally riding into town for supplies. The locals knew him as a man of few words but reliable character, someone who kept to himself but would never turn away a neighbor in need. The crisp morning air filled his lungs as he made his way back to the cabin, boots crunching against the frost-covered ground. Winter was approaching fast at this elevation, and he needed to prepare. Inside, he stoked the dying embers in his fireplace, bringing warmth back to the simple but comfortable interior. The walls were adorned with practical items, tools, a few books, and a single photograph of his parents, both long gone now. After a simple breakfast of coffee and bacon, Wade stepped outside to begin his day's work. He was midway through feeding his horses when he spotted movement on the distant horizon. Narrowing his eyes, he made out the silhouette of a wagon approaching his property, an unusual sight this far from town. Something about its uneven path struck him as wrong. Wade reached for his rifle, keeping it at the ready as the wagon drew closer. It was moving too slowly, and as it came into clearer view, he could see it was in poor condition. One wheel was clearly damaged, causing the entire vehicle to list precariously to one side. The single horse pulling it looked exhausted, its head hanging low. "Hello there," Wade called out, keeping a cautious distance. When no response came, he approached slowly, rifle lowered but still in hand. As he neared, he saw the driver slumped forward against the seat. It was a woman, young from what he could tell, her clothes travel-worn and dusty. Her golden brown hair fell in tangled waves around her face, partially obscuring her features. "Madam," he called, louder this time, "are you all right?" The woman stirred at his voice, lifting her head slowly. Her face was smudged with dirt and marked with dried tear tracks. Her eyes, a striking hazel that caught him off guard, were red-rimmed and swollen from crying. "Help," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please." Wade quickly secured his rifle and moved to steady the horse, which had come to a grateful stop. Up close, he could see the woman's hands were blistered from holding the reins too tightly for too long. Her simple dress was torn in places, and she wore no coat despite the mountain chill. "Let's get you inside," Wade said, reaching up to help her down. She hesitated for a moment, studying his face with wary eyes, before nodding weakly. As she attempted to stand, her legs buckled beneath her. Wade caught her before she fell, lifting her with ease. She was lighter than he expected, and he felt a surge of concern at how frail she seemed. "I'm sorry," she murmured against his shoulder, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I have nowhere to go." Wade looked at the dilapidated wagon, noticing for the first time how empty it was, just a small trunk, and what appeared to be a bundle of personal belongings wrapped in a worn quilt. Whatever journey had brought this woman to his doorstep had clearly cost her dearly. "I have enough for both of us," Wade whispered, surprising himself with the words. He hadn't intended to say them aloud, they simply came to him as naturally as breathing. The woman's teary eyes met his, a flicker of hope appearing through her exhaustion. Wade carried her into his home, knowing instinctively that his solitary life was about to change forever. Inside the cabin, Wade gently set the woman down on his worn leather chair near the fireplace. The warmth seemed to revive her slightly, and she drew a deep, shuddering breath. "My name is Clara," she said after a moment, her voice steadier but still weak. "Clara Lawson." "Wade Bennett," he replied, moving to the kitchen area to put on a pot of coffee. "You're safe now, Miss Lawson." Clara nodded, though her eyes darted nervously around the cabin, taking in her surroundings. Wade gave her space, understanding the wariness of someone who had clearly been through an ordeal. How long since you've eaten?" he asked, noticing how her collarbone protruded beneath her threadbare dress. 2 days, maybe, she admitted. I had some bread, but it ran out. Wade set about preparing a simple meal of beans, bacon, and biscuits left over from his breakfast. As he worked, he kept his movements deliberate and calm, not wanting to startle his unexpected guest. From the corner of his eye, he observed her. She couldn't be older than 25, with delicate features that spoke of a gentler upbringing than the current state of her appearance suggested. "Your wagon," he began. "It broke down about 3 miles back," she said. "I managed to get it this far, but the wheel is beyond repair." A deep sorrow crossed her face. "It was my father's." Wade nodded, allowing her the space to continue if she wished. When she remained silent, he set a plate of food and a cup of coffee before her. Clara looked at the offering with wide eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for the fork. "Eat slowly," Wade advised. "Your stomach will need time to adjust." Clara took a small bite, closing her eyes as she savored the simple food. Wade busied himself with practical matters he needed to tend to her horse and retrieve her belongings before nightfall. "I'll bring your things in and see to your horse," he said, heading for the door. "Rest. We can talk more when I return." Outside, Wade approached the exhausted animal, speaking softly as he unhitched it from the damaged wagon. The horse was a decent mare. Though clearly malnourished and overworked, he led it to his small barn, settling it beside his own 2 horses with fresh hay and water. The wagon told its own story, a once fine carriage reduced to a weathered shell. The contents were meager. The small trunk contained a few dresses, some undergarments, a hairbrush with several bristles missing, and a worn Bible. The bundle held a patchwork quilt that had seen better days and a small wooden box containing a locket, a wedding band, and a few other personal trinkets. At the bottom of the trunk lay a single sheet of paper, a death certificate for Thomas Lawson, dated just 3 weeks prior in Denver. Wade carefully repacked everything and carried it back to the cabin. When he entered, he found Clara had finished half her plate and was staring into the fire, lost in thought. "Your horse will be fine after some rest and proper feeding," he said, setting her belongings down. "The wagon needs work, but we can worry about that later." Clara nodded gratefully. "Mr. Bennett, I don't know how to repay your kindness." "No need," he replied. "Anyone would do the same." A sad smile touched her lips. "Not everyone." She set her plate aside, her hands twisting together in her lap. "I should explain why I'm here." "Only if you want to," Wade said, taking a seat across from her. Clara drew a deep breath. "My father died 3 weeks ago in Denver, consumption. We had moved there from St. Louis after my mother passed, hoping the mountain air would help him." Her voice trembled slightly. "He was a bookkeeper, but his illness left us with debts. After he died, the creditors took our house and most of our belongings." Wade listened silently, his face betraying nothing of the anger he felt at the thought of vultures descending on a grieving daughter. "I had an aunt in a mining town called Silverton," Clara continued. "I wrote to her last year, but never received a reply. With nowhere else to go, I used the last of my money to buy that wagon and horse, hoping she might take me in." Her fingers twisted the fabric of her dress. "When I arrived in Silverton 3 days ago, I discovered she had died last winter." A tear slipped down her cheek, which she hastily wiped away. "I had no plan after that. I just drove. I saw smoke from your chimney and hoped—" Her voice trailed off. "You hoped right," Wade said simply. "You can stay as long as you need. The spare room upstairs isn't much." "But it's yours." Clara's eyes widened. "I couldn't impose—" "It's no imposition," Wade interrupted gently. "Winter's coming. These mountains are no place to be without shelter." For a moment, Clara looked as though she might argue, but exhaustion won out. "Just until I find work in Leadville," she insisted. "I won't be a burden." Wade nodded, knowing better than to challenge her pride. "Rest today. Tomorrow's soon enough to worry about what comes next." That night, after showing Clara to the small bedroom that had served as storage more than living space, Wade lay awake on his bedroll near the fire. The quiet solitude of his home felt different somehow, not intruded upon, but transformed. He'd lived alone since coming to Colorado 3 years ago, after the war, and years of drifting had left him craving peace and isolation. Yet something about Clara's presence felt right, as though his home had been waiting for her arrival. It was a foolish thought, he knew, born of loneliness perhaps. Still, as he drifted to sleep, Wade couldn't help but wonder what tomorrow would bring with Clara Lawson under his roof. In the pale light of dawn, Clara woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was. The unfamiliar ceiling above her, the rough but clean blankets, the scent of pine and leather, it all came rushing back as she remembered her arrival at the Bennett ranch. She sat up slowly, her body aching from weeks of hard travel. Through the small window, she could see the first golden rays of sunlight illuminating the rugged landscape. Mountains rose majestically in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. It was beautiful, a stark contrast to the grimy streets of Denver she'd left behind. The sound of movement downstairs told her Wade was already awake. Clara smoothed her tangled hair as best she could and straightened her wrinkled dress, wishing she had something more presentable to wear. Pride had always been her companion, even in the darkest times, and appearing disheveled before her benefactor felt like another small defeat. Downstairs, Wade was stoking the fire, his sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle from years of ranch work. He turned at her footsteps, offering a brief nod in greeting. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's ready if you'd like some." "Thank you," Clara replied, painfully aware of how inadequate those words were for all he'd done. She poured herself a cup, warming her hands around the tin mug. Wade moved with efficient ease around the kitchen area, cracking eggs into a cast-iron skillet. "Thought you might be hungry," he explained. "Need to keep your strength up." Clara watched him work, struck by the contradiction he presented. Everything about Wade Bennett suggested a man accustomed to solitude, from his economical movements to his sparse speech. Yet there was a gentleness in how he'd cared for her, a consideration that spoke of deeper character than his rough exterior suggested. "Mr. Bennett," she began, "I want to thank you properly for taking me in. Not many would show such kindness to a stranger." Wade shrugged, turning the eggs with practiced precision. "Out here, folks have to look out for one another. The land doesn't forgive those who turn their backs on people in need." "Still," Clara persisted, "I intend to repay your kindness. I'm a hard worker. I can cook, clean, mend whatever you need while I'm here." Wade placed a plate of eggs and salt pork before her. "Eat first. We can discuss the rest later." After breakfast, Wade explained he needed to ride out to check on his cattle. Before leaving, he showed Clara where everything was in the cabin and told her to make herself at home. "I should be back by midday," he said, pulling on his worn leather coat. "There's water in the barrel out back if you want to wash up. Soap's by the basin." Clara nodded gratefully. A proper wash was something she'd been longing for after days on the road. Once Wade had departed, Clara set about exploring her temporary home. The cabin was simple but solidly built, with practical furnishings that spoke more of function than comfort. Still, there were unexpected touches: a shelf of well-read books, a hand-carved chess set on a small table by the window, a colorful quilt that seemed out of place among the otherwise utilitarian decor. After bringing in water, Clara heated it on the stove and enjoyed the luxury of washing away days of travel dust. She changed into one of her few remaining dresses, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was at least clean. Then, unable to remain idle, she began to clean. By the time Wade returned, the cabin had been transformed. The floors were swept, dishes washed, surfaces dusted, and a stew was simmering on the stove, made from provisions she'd found in his pantry. Wade paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the changes. "You didn't need to do all this," he said finally. "I wanted to," Clara replied. "It helps me feel useful. I hope I haven't overstepped." A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. "No, it's fine. Just not used to coming home to—" He gestured vaguely at the cabin. "A woman's touch," Clara supplied with a small smile of her own. "Something like that." Wade removed his hat, hanging it on a peg by the door. "Smells good." "Just a simple stew. I hope you don't mind that I use some of your supplies." "That's what they're there for," Wade said, washing his hands in the basin. "Found your wagon wheel while I was out. It's beyond repair, but I can ride into town tomorrow and see about getting a replacement." Clara's eyes widened. "I couldn't ask you to do that. It would be expensive." "Consider it a loan," Wade interrupted gently. "When you get settled, You can pay me back if it matters that much to you. Clara wanted to protest further, but recognized the practical necessity. Without a working wagon, she had no means of transport to Leadville or anywhere else. Thank you, she said instead. I will repay you, Mr. Bennett, every cent. Wade, he corrected, if we're going to be sharing space, might as well use my given name. Wade, Clara repeated, feeling a strange flutter in her chest at this small intimacy. And I'm Clara, not Miss Lawson. He nodded, and for a moment they simply looked at each other, something unspoken passing between them. Wade broke the moment first, turning to ladle stew into bowls. As they ate, Clara ventured a question. Have you lived here long? 3 years, Wade replied. Bought the land cheap after the first silver boom faded and before the new one hit. You were fortunate with your timing. Wade's mouth quirked. Luck had little to do with it. I watched the mining patterns, saw where things were heading. Figured I'd rather raise cattle than dig holes, though. Were you a miner before? Among other things. Wade's tone didn't invite further questions on that subject. Instead, he asked, What will you do in Leadville? What kind of work are you looking for? Clara hesitated. I'm not entirely sure. In St. Louis, I was a teacher's assistant at a girls' school before my father fell ill. In Denver, I took in sewing and mending. Her fingers traced the edge of the wooden table. I'm not afraid of hard work, whatever it might be. Leadville has a school, Wade offered. Growing fast with all the silver strikes, they might need teachers. Hope flickered in Clara's chest. Teaching had been her passion before circumstances had forced her to set it aside. Do you think they would consider someone without formal qualifications? Wade shrugged. Town's desperate for civilizing influences. Miners are bringing their families now. Worth asking at least. I will, Clara said, determination settling over her features. When we go to town for the wagon wheel, perhaps I could make inquiries. We'll go day after tomorrow, Wade decided. Weather's turning. Best to prepare before the snow sets in. That night, Clara lay in bed listening to the wind whistling around the cabin corners. She thought of her father, wondering what he would make of her current situation. Thomas Lawson had been a gentle, scholarly man, ill-suited to the harshness of frontier life. He'd brought her west out of desperation, hoping to extend his life for her sake more than his own. The memory of his wasted face in those final days still haunted her. I'll be all right, Papa, she whispered into the darkness. I'll find my way. Something about Wade Bennett made her believe it might be true. There was a steadiness to him that provided comfort, a quiet strength that didn't demand acknowledgement. For the first time in months, Clara fell asleep without fear shadowing her dreams. The next day passed in a comfortable rhythm of shared work. Wade taught Clara about caring for the horses, showing patient hands as he demonstrated how to check hooves and brush down the animals. Clara, in turn, mended a tear in Wade's spare shirt, her neat stitches drawing an appreciative nod from the rancher. By evening, Clara felt a growing ease in Wade's presence. He wasn't a talkative man, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. She learned he had fought in the war between the states as a young man, though he offered no details beyond that simple fact. He'd traveled extensively afterward, working ranch jobs from Texas to Montana before settling in Colorado. What struck her most was his evident respect for her situation. He never once made her feel like a burden or an object of pity. The following morning dawned clear and cold. Clara dressed in her warmest clothes, which were woefully inadequate for the mountain autumn. Wade noticed her thin shawl with a frown. "You'll freeze before we make it halfway to town," he said, disappearing into his room. He returned with a heavy wool coat that engulfed her small frame. "It's old, but it'll keep the wind out." Clara wanted to refuse it. Felt like another charity, but practicality won out. "Thank you, I'll be careful with it." The ride to Leadville took nearly 2 hours, Wade's sturdy gelding carrying them both, with Clara perched somewhat awkwardly behind him. The town appeared suddenly around a bend in the road, a bustling collection of wooden buildings sprawled across a high mountain valley, smoke rising from dozens of chimneys. Beyond the town, Clara could see the evidence of mining operations scarring the mountainsides. "Biggest silver strike in Colorado history," Wade explained, following her gaze. Town went from 100 people to thousands in just a couple years. Leadville was indeed a town in the throes of explosive growth. The main street was a chaotic mixture of hastily built structures, saloons, and brothels standing alongside more respectable establishments. Wagons and horses crowded the muddy thoroughfare, while men of all descriptions hurried about their business. A few women were visible, most dressed in finery that marked them as either prosperous wives or women of another profession entirely. Wade helped Clara dismount in front of a large general store. "Let's see about that wheel first, then we can inquire about the school." Inside, the store was a treasure trove of goods, practical necessities, alongside luxuries imported at great expense from the East. While Wade spoke with the proprietor about the wagon wheel, Clara couldn't help but wander the aisles, fingers trailing over bolts of fabric she could never afford. "Anything catch your eye, miss?" a friendly voice asked. Clara turned to see a plump woman with kind eyes watching her from behind a counter. "Just looking," Clara replied with a small smile. "It's been some time since I've seen such a well-stocked store." "New to Leadville, are you?" The woman extended her hand. "Martha Wilson. My husband George owns the place." "Clara Lawson." "Yes, I've just arrived." "Actually," she hesitated before continuing, "I was hoping to find work here. I heard the town has a school." Martha's face brightened. "Indeed we do. Just built last year. Are you a teacher, dear?" "I was an assistant teacher in St. Louis," Clara explained. "I don't have formal qualifications, but I'm well educated and good with children." "Well, now that's providential," Martha exclaimed. "The school committee meets at the church this very afternoon. Our only teacher, Miss Parker, is overwhelmed with all the new families arriving. She's been begging for an assistant." She lowered her voice. "Between us, I'm on the committee, and I'd be happy to put in a good word." Hope surged in Clara's chest. "I would be so grateful, Mrs. Wilson. The meeting's at 3:00. You come by, and we'll introduce you." Martha glanced past Clara to where Wade was concluding his business. "Is that your husband?" Clara felt her cheeks warm. "No, Mr. Bennett is a friend. He's been kind enough to help me since my arrival." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly, but she merely nodded. "Wade Bennett is a good man. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in his dealings." She smiled. "Any friend of his is welcome here." Wade approached, nodding politely to Martha. "Mrs. Wilson." "Mr. Bennett." "Good to see you in town. Been too long." "Nature of ranching," he replied. To Clara, he explained, "Wheel will be ready in 2 hours. Mr. Wilson is sending his boy to fetch one from their storage." Clara told Wade about the school committee meeting, watching uncertainty cross his features. "I don't want to keep you in town longer than necessary," she added quickly. "Perhaps I could stay and find my own way back." Wade shook his head. "Roads aren't safe for a woman alone, especially near dusk. I'll wait." "You could both take lunch at Harrigan's Cafe while you wait," Martha suggested, "and perhaps show Miss Lawson around town. Much has changed since your last visit, Mr. Bennett." Wade looked as though he might refuse, but after glancing at Clara's hopeful expression, he nodded. "If Miss Lawson would like that." "I would," Clara said warmly. "Very much." Outside, Wade led the way down the busy street, occasionally placing a protective hand at Clara's elbow when they needed to navigate around particularly muddy sections or busy crossings. His touch was light but firm, and Clara found herself oddly comforted by it. Harrigan's Cafe was a simple establishment offering hearty fare to miners and townspeople alike. Wade selected a table near the back, positioning himself so he could observe the room, while Clara sat with her back to the wall. "Old habit," he explained when she noticed. "Like to see who's coming and going." They ordered stew and fresh bread, which arrived steaming hot and delicious. Clara savored every bite, realizing how long it had been since she'd eaten a meal she hadn't prepared herself. "Tell me about the ranch," she said between bites. "How many cattle do you have?" 47 head, Wade replied. "Started with just 10, building slowly, but they're quality stock. Hope to double the herd by next year if the winter's not too harsh." "You manage it all alone?" "Hire help for spring branding and fall roundup. Rest of the time, it's just me." He took a sip of coffee. "Simpler that way." "Doesn't it get lonely?" The question slipped out before Clara could consider its propriety. Wade's eyes met hers, something unreadable in their depths. "Used to the quiet," he said after a moment. "Came to prefer it after a while." Clara nodded, understanding more than he might realize. After her mother's death and her father's long illness, she too had grown accustomed to silence, to the absence of laughter and conversation that had once filled their home. "I understand," she said softly, "though I admit these past 2 days at your ranch have reminded me that there's comfort in having someone else near, even if we're not always talking." A ghost of a smile touched Wade's lips. "There is that." After lunch, they walked through town, Wade pointing out various establishments, the assay office where miners brought their silver ore, the bank, the newspaper office, and finally the schoolhouse where Clara would be meeting the committee later. It was a simple one-room building with a bell tower, freshly painted white and looking somehow more substantial than the hastily constructed saloons and boarding houses surrounding it. Clara's heart quickened at the sight. Teaching again, it seemed almost too much to hope for. "Nervous?" Wade asked, noticing her expression. "A little," Clara admitted. "It would mean so much to have steady employment, to build something again." Wade studied her face. "You'll do fine. Got a way about you, steady, thoughtful. Children respond to that." Coming from a man of so few words, the observation felt like high praise. Clara smiled up at him, touched by his confidence. "Thank you, Wade." As 3 o'clock approached, they made their way to the small church where the committee meeting was to take place. Martha Wilson greeted them warmly, introducing Clara to the other committee members, the pastor, the bank manager, and the current teacher, Miss Parker, a stern-looking woman with intelligent eyes. "Miss Lawson has experience as a teacher's assistant in St. Louis," Martha explained. "She's only recently arrived in Leadville and is looking to continue in education." The interview was more informal than Clara had expected. They asked about her background, her teaching philosophy, and whether she was comfortable with the rigors of frontier education. Clara answered honestly, her passion for learning evident in every response. Miss Parker seemed particularly interested in Clara's experience with younger children. "I find myself overwhelmed with the little ones," she admitted. "My strength is in advanced subjects for the older students. If you could take charge of the primary lessons, it would be a tremendous help." By the end of the hour, Clara had been offered the position of assistant teacher to begin the following Monday. The salary was modest, but included room and board in a small apartment above the school, an arrangement that filled Clara with both relief and a strange, unexpected pang at the thought of leaving Wade's ranch. Outside the church, Wade was waiting, his tall figure leaning against a hitching post. He straightened when he saw her, a questioning look in his eyes. "I got the position," Clara told him, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "I start Monday, and they've offered lodging above the schoolroom." "That's good news," Wade said, though his expression remained neutral. "The wheel's ready. We should head back before dark." The ride home was quieter than their journey into town. Clara found herself acutely aware of Wade's solid presence before her, of her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The thought of not seeing him daily after she moved to town left her with an emptiness she hadn't anticipated. "I can't thank you enough," she said as they approached the ranch, the cabin a welcoming sight in the gathering dusk. "Without your help, I don't know what would have become of me." Wade remained silent for a long moment. "Sometimes paths cross when they're meant to," he finally said, his voice low enough that Clara had to strain to hear it over the horse's hoofbeats. "Glad I could be there when you needed someone." That evening, they shared a simple supper, discussing practical matters when Wade would help her move to town, how soon the wagon might be repaired, what supplies she might need for her new position. Yet beneath the practicalities ran an undercurrent of something neither seemed willing to name. As Clara prepared for bed, she found herself lingering in the main room, reluctant to end the day. Wade sat by the fire, whittling a piece of wood with practiced strokes of his knife. "What are you making?" she asked, drawn to the peaceful rhythm of his hands. "Chess piece," he replied, holding up the partially formed figure. "Night broke on my set last winter. Been meaning to replace it." Clara moved closer, genuinely interested. "You play chess?" "My father taught me. Used to play most evenings." A rare smile touched his features. "He never let me win. Said it wouldn't teach me anything worthwhile." "My father was the same way," Clara said, smiling at the memory. Though his game was backgammon, he believed games developed character. Smart man? He was. Clara sat in the chair opposite Wade, watching his hands work the wood. "Would you teach me chess someday? I've always wanted to learn." Wade's hands stilled, his eyes meeting hers across the firelight. "Be happy to," he said, and something in his tone made Clara's heart beat faster. "Got time before you leave?" "Yes," she agreed softly. "We have time." Over the next 3 days, a new rhythm developed between them. During the day, they worked side by side on the ranch Wade, teaching Clara about cattle ranching, while she helped with whatever tasks she could manage. In the evenings after supper, Wade began teaching her chess, his patience evident as he explained the movement of each piece, the strategy of the game. Clara proved a quick study, her mind naturally attuned to the patterns and possibilities. By the third night, she managed to put Wade in check, drawing a rare laugh from him. "You're a natural," he said, his eyes warm with appreciation. "Took my father months to teach me that move." "I have a good teacher," Clara replied, enjoying the way the compliment brought color to his tanned cheeks. The night before she was to move to town, a fierce storm blew in from the mountains. Wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows as rain pounded against the roof. Wade added extra logs to the fire, casting concerned glances outside. "Weather's turning faster than I expected," he said. "Winter's coming early this year." Clara stood by the window, watching lightning illuminate the distant peaks. "Will it affect the cattle?" "They'll be fine, bred for these mountains." Wade moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Might delay our trip to town tomorrow, though. These storms can last days up here." Clara turned to face him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. In the firelight, Wade's features seemed softer, the usual guardedness in his eyes replaced by something warmer. "I wouldn't mind," she said quietly. "I've come to enjoy being here." Wade's gaze held hers. "Cabins felt different with you in it. Better." The admission hung between them, simple yet profound. Clara felt her heart quicken as Wade's hand moved slowly, hesitantly, to brush a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, rough with calluses, yet achingly gentle. "Clara," he began, his voice barely audible above the storm. A tremendous crash of thunder shook the cabin, making them both start. The moment broken, Wade stepped back, his expression closing once more. "Better check the barn," he said, reaching for his coat. "Make sure the horses are calm." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. She remained by the window, her heart racing, her cheek still warm where his fingers had touched her. The storm continued through the night and into the next day, making travel impossible. Clara sent word to the school committee via a passing neighbor that her arrival would be delayed. 3 more days passed, the enforced proximity both sweet torture and unexpected blessing. Something had shifted between them since that moment by the window. Wade seemed both more attentive and more guarded, as though fighting against feelings he wasn't ready to acknowledge. Clara found herself equally conflicted, drawn to this quiet, honorable man, yet aware that her future lay in town. In the independence she had fought so hard to achieve. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke, leaving behind a transformed landscape. The mountains gleamed with fresh snow, and the air held the sharp bite of approaching winter. "Road should be passable by tomorrow," Wade said as they finished breakfast. "I'll take you to town then." Clara nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "I've imposed on your hospitality far too long already." "It's not been an imposition," Wade said firmly. "Not at all." That afternoon, as Clara packed her few belongings, she came across the coat Wade had lent her for their trip to Leadville. She held it for a moment, then carried it downstairs to where Wade was repairing a bridle by the fire. "Your coat," she said, holding it out. "Thank you for lending it to me." Wade looked up, his hands stilling on the leather. "Keep it," he said. "You'll need it in town. Winters are harsh up here." "I couldn't—" "Please," he interrupted. "I have another, and knowing you're warm would ease my mind." The simple concern in his voice touched Clara deeply. "Thank you," she said, clutching the coat to her chest. "For everything." Wade set aside the bridle and stood, moving toward her with purpose in his stride. He stopped just before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Clara," he said, her name sounding like a prayer on his lips. "These past days, having you here—" Words seemed to fail him, but his eyes spoke volumes, longing, uncertainty, and something deeper that made Clara's breath catch. "I know," she whispered, because she did. Whatever was growing between them was as undeniable as it was unexpected. Wade's hand reached for hers, strong fingers intertwining with her slender ones. "I'm not good with words," he admitted. "Never have been. But I want you to know you'll always have a place here, if you ever need it, if you ever want it." Clara felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "I've never met anyone like you, Wade Bennett," she said softly. "You took in a stranger with nothing and asked for nothing in return. You had tears," he said simply, "but you also had courage. That's not nothing." Their fingers remained intertwined, neither willing to be the first to let go. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that leaving the next day would be one of the hardest things she'd ever done. The morning of Clara's departure dawned clear and cold. Wade loaded her trunk and the bundle of her belongings into his wagon, the damaged wheel now replaced. They had agreed he would drive her to town and then return with the wagon, which she could use later if needed. The journey passed too quickly, the magnificent mountain scenery barely registering as Clara struggled with the growing ache in her chest. Beside her, Wade was quieter than usual, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Leadville appeared around the bend, the bustling town unaware of the small drama playing out between the two people approaching its outskirts. "Will you write?" Clara asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Wade glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "If you'd like that, I would," she said firmly. "Very much." A smile touched his lips. "Then I will." The schoolhouse looked welcoming in the morning light, the bell gleaming in its tower. Wade helped Clara with her belongings, carrying them up the narrow stairs to the small apartment that would be her new home. The space was simple but clean: a bed, a table with 2 chairs, a small stove, and a window overlooking the main street. "It's lovely," Clara said, trying to inject enthusiasm into her voice. After the warmth of Wade's cabin, the room felt sterile, impersonal. Wade set down her trunk, his tall frame making the space seem even smaller. For a moment, they stood facing each other, all the words they'd left unspoken hanging between them. "I should go," Wade said finally. "Let you get settled." Clara nodded, though everything within her wanted to ask him to stay. "Thank you for the ride. And for everything before." Wade reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small wooden object. "Made this for you," he said, placing it in her palm. "To remember our lessons." It was a chess piece, a queen, exquisitely carved from pale wood, every detail rendered with care. Clara ran her finger over the smooth surface, touched beyond words by the gift. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll treasure it." "The queen's the most powerful piece," Wade said, his voice low. "Reminded me of you." Clara looked up, meeting his gaze. "I don't feel very powerful." "You are," he said with quiet conviction. "More than you know." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "Be well, Clara Lawson," he murmured. Then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the wooden stairs. Clara moved to the window, watching as he climbed into his wagon and drove away without looking back. Only when he had disappeared from view did she allow the tears to fall, clutching the wooden queen to her heart. Life in Leadville quickly settled into a routine for Clara. The schoolchildren, nearly 40 of them, ranging in age from 5 to 16, took to her gentle authority and genuine interest in their progress. Miss Parker, initially reserved, soon came to rely on Clara's assistance and innovative teaching methods. Clara's days were full, her evenings quiet. She made friends among the townspeople, particularly Martha Wilson, who often invited her to Sunday dinner. She attended church, joined the Ladies' Aid Society, and slowly began to feel part of the community. Yet in the stillness of night, her thoughts invariably turned to the ranch 10 miles away, to the man who had saved her when she had nothing. True to his word, Wade wrote brief, straightforward letters reporting on ranch matters, the weather, occasionally mentioning chess. Clara treasured each one, reading between the sparse lines for glimpses of the man himself. As November turned to December, Leadville prepared for Christmas. The schoolhouse was decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons, and the children practiced carols for the Christmas Eve service. Clara threw herself into the preparations, helping to organize a pageant and making small gifts for each of her students. A week before Christmas, Clara was at the general store selecting candy for the children's stockings when the bell above the door jangled. She looked up to see Wade entering, snow dusting his shoulders and hat. Her heart leaped at the sight of him. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face more weathered from the winter wind, but his eyes lit up when they found her across the store. "Wade," she said, moving toward him without conscious thought. "What brings you to town?" "Supplies," he replied, removing his hat. "And this." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Christmas gift," he explained, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "Wasn't sure I'd see you before the holiday." Clara accepted the package, deeply touched by the gesture. "I have something for you as well," she admitted. "It's at the school. Would you have time to walk me there?" Wade nodded, something like hope flickering in his eyes. They completed their purchases and stepped out into the snowy street, walking side by side through the bustling town. Clara was acutely aware of how right it felt to be beside him again, how naturally they fell into step together. At the schoolhouse, Clara invited him upstairs to her apartment, suddenly self-conscious of the modest space. "It's not much," she said, gesturing around the room. "It suits you," Wade replied, his eyes taking in the small touches that made it hers. Books stacked on the table, a vase of dried wildflowers, a patchwork pillow on the lone armchair. His gaze stopped on the wooden chess piece, displayed prominently on the windowsill. "Would you like coffee?" Clara offered. "Or tea?" "Coffee would be fine," Wade said, removing his coat. As Clara busied herself with the stove, a comfortable silence fell between them. It struck her how much she had missed this, the quiet understanding, the absence of need for constant conversation. "How's the ranch?" she asked, setting 2 cups on the table. "Good. Cattle are weathering the winter well. Built a new fence line on the north pasture." Wade accepted the coffee gratefully. "And the school?" "Wonderful," Clara said, her enthusiasm genuine. "The children are bright and eager to learn. We're preparing a Christmas pageant now." Wade smiled, a real smile that transformed his features. "Always knew you'd make a fine teacher." Clara blushed at the praise. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into a drawer. She withdrew a carefully wrapped package. "It's not much, but—" Wade unwrapped it slowly, revealing a hand-knit scarf in deep blue wool. "You made this?" he asked, running his fingers over the even stitches. "In the evenings," Clara confirmed. "Martha Wilson taught me to knit. I thought, with the winter being so harsh—" "It's perfect," Wade said, the simple sincerity in his voice making Clara's heart swell. "Thank you." He gestured to the package he had brought. "Your turn." Clara unwrapped it carefully, gasping when she saw what lay inside, a complete chess set. Each piece hand-carved from different woods, the board itself inlaid with alternating squares of light and dark timber. "Wade," she breathed, lifting a knight to examine the intricate details. "Did you make this? It must have taken weeks." "Had time in the evenings," he said, echoing her earlier words with a small smile. "Thought maybe we could play sometimes, when you visit." The invitation hung in the air between them, laden with meaning. Clara looked up from the beautiful gift to find Wade watching her intently, vulnerability evident in his usually guarded expression. "I would like that very much," she said softly. Wade's shoulders relaxed slightly, as though he had been holding his breath. "Been too quiet," he admitted, "at the ranch, without you." The simple confession broke something open in Clara's heart. "I've missed it," she whispered. "Missed the mountains, the quiet." She met his eyes steadily. "Missed you." Wade moved toward her then, slowly, as though giving her time to retreat if she wished. Clara remained still, her heart pounding as he reached for her hand. "I'm not a man of many words," he began, his voice low and earnest. "Never have been. But these months without you, they've been empty somehow. Keep thinking of things to tell you, moments I wish you could see." Clara's free hand moved to his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I think of you every day," she confessed, "of your kindness when I had nothing, of how safe I felt in your home." Wade turned his face slightly to press a kiss against her palm. "Could be your home, too," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. "If you wanted." Clara's breath caught at the implication. "Wade, are you asking—" "I love you," he interrupted, the words bursting from him as though he couldn't contain them any longer. Don't know when it happened. Maybe that first day when you arrived with nothing but tears and still had the courage to go on. Maybe during chess lessons by the fire. All I know is I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. I love you too, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion overwhelming her. I think I've known it since you whispered you had enough for both of us. No one had ever offered to share their strength with me like that before. Wade's hands framed her face with infinite tenderness. Clara Lawson, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I don't have much to offer but a simple life and a heart that's yours completely. Yes, Clara whispered, her tears spilling over. Yes, Wade Bennett. There's nothing I want more. His kiss was gentle at first, a question she answered by drawing closer, her arms encircling his neck as the kiss deepened. In that moment, everything else faded away, the months of separation, the uncertainties of the future, the hardships of the past. There was only this man, this love, this perfect certainty that she had found her home at last. When they finally parted, Wade rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. When? He asked simply. Clara smiled up at him. The school term ends in May. I wouldn't want to leave the children without a teacher. Wade nodded, understanding immediately. May then, I can wait. His eyes held a promise that made her knees weak. Been waiting my whole life for you, it seems. A few more months won't matter. Those months passed in a blur of anticipation and preparation. Wade rode into town whenever weather permitted, sometimes staying for Sunday dinner at the Wilsons', where Martha took great delight in their engagement. Clara visited the ranch on occasional weekends, always returning to town with a deeper certainty that she was making the right choice. They were married on the last Saturday in May 1879, in the small church where Clara had first interviewed for her teaching position. The entire town seemed to attend Clara's students, the parents who had come to respect her dedication, the shopkeepers and miners who had welcomed her into their community. Clara wore a simple white dress that Martha had helped her make, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers gathered from the meadows near Wade's ranch. As she walked down the aisle toward Wade, handsome in a new black suit that made him look somewhat uncomfortable, Clara's heart was so full she thought it might burst. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows exchanged with clear voices and steady hands. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Wade's kiss was gentle but held a promise of the passion they would share in the privacy of their home. The celebration afterward was joyous music and dancing, food and laughter filling the town hall into the evening hours. As dusk fell, Wade led Clara to his wagon, now decorated with ribbons and flowers by her mischievous students. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Bennett?" he asked, helping her up to the seat. "More than ready, Mr. Bennett," Clara replied, her smile radiant in the fading light. The journey to the ranch was filled with a sweet anticipation neither felt the need to articulate. When they crested the final hill and the cabin came into view, Clara caught her breath. Lanterns had been hung from the porch posts, casting a golden glow that welcomed them home. "Martha's doing," Wade explained with a smile. "She rode out this morning to prepare things." Inside, the cabin had been transformed. Fresh flowers stood in vases. The bed was made with clean linens, and a small wedding cake waited on the table. But what brought tears to Clara's eyes was the sight of her books arranged on Wade's shelves, her quilt draped over his chair, her chess piece reunited with its set on the side table. "You brought my things," she whispered. "Wanted it to feel like your home," Wade said, watching her reaction carefully. "Because it is." Clara turned to face her husband, overwhelmed with love for this quiet, thoughtful man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "It already does," she assured him, reaching for his hands. "Because you're here." That night, Wade showed Clara the depths of his love in the most intimate way, his hands and lips gentle yet insistent, as they discovered each other fully for the first time. In the warmth of their marriage bed, all barriers fell away, leaving only trust and tenderness between them. Afterward, lying in his arms with the moonlight spilling through the window, Clara traced the scar that ran along his left shoulder, a remnant of the war he rarely mentioned. "Happy?" Wade asked, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. "Completely," Clara replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. Are you? Wade's arms tightened around her. More than I ever thought possible. In the weeks and months that followed, Clara and Wade built their life together with the same care and attention they had shown in building their love. Clara learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising early to help with chores, learning to ride properly so she could assist with the cattle, planting a vegetable garden that thrived under her attentive care. Wade, in turn, expanded the cabin, adding a proper kitchen and a second bedroom for the future, as he put it, with a meaningful glance that made Clara blush. They worked side by side through the summer and fall, their partnership strengthening with each passing day. When winter came again, they faced it together, the howling storms holding no fear now that they had each other for warmth and comfort. On snowy evenings, they played chess by the fire, read aloud from Clara's books, or simply sat in companionable silence, the contentment between them requiring no words. In the spring of 1880, Clara discovered she was expecting their first child. Wade's reaction to the news, a stunned silence followed by tears he didn't try to hide, only deepened her love for him. Throughout her pregnancy, his protectiveness was tempered with respect for her strength and independence, a balance Clara cherished. Their son, Thomas Wade Bennett, was born on a crisp October morning, his lusty cries filling the cabin, as Martha Wilson, who had come to assist with the birth, placed him in his father's trembling hands. "He's perfect," Wade whispered, carefully transferring the swaddled infant to Clara's waiting arms. "Just like his mother." Clara looked down at their child, overwhelmed with love for this tiny being who represented everything she and Wade had built together. "He has your chin," she observed with a tired smile, "and I think he'll have your quiet strength as well." As Thomas grew, so did the ranch. Wade's careful management and hard work paid off, allowing them to hire a permanent ranch hand and expand their herd significantly. Clara divided her time between caring for their son, maintaining the home, and teaching not in a formal classroom anymore, but through community gatherings where she offered lessons to neighboring children and adults eager to improve their reading and writing. 3 years after Thomas's birth, their family expanded again with the arrival of Emma Rose Bennett, a fair-haired daughter with her mother's hazel eyes and her father's determined spirit. Wade, who had once believed his life would be spent in solitude, found himself surrounded by love and laughter, his quiet nature softened by the joyful chaos of family life. On the 5th anniversary of the day Clara had first arrived at the ranch, Wade presented her with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children. "To remind you of how far we've come," he said as he fastened it around her neck, "from that day when you had nothing but tears." Clara touched the locket reverently, then reached for her husband's hand. "I had more than tears that day," she corrected gently. "I had hope, and I found you." Wade drew her into his arms, his kiss as tender as it had been on their wedding day. "And I found everything I never knew I wanted," he murmured against her lips. As twilight settled over the Colorado mountains, painting the landscape in shades of purple and gold, Clara and Wade sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas, solemn and thoughtful at 4, was showing his sister how to build a tower with wooden blocks Wade had carved for them. "Did you ever imagine this?" Clara asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "That day when I arrived?" Wade's arm tightened around her. "Never," he admitted, "but I knew one thing for certain." "What was that?" His eyes, warm with love, met hers. "That I'd give you everything I had, for as long as you needed it." Clara smiled, remembering his words from that first-day words that had given her hope when she had nothing else. "You know what I've learned, Wade Bennett?" "What's that, Clara Bennett?" She kissed him softly, pouring all her love into the simple gesture. "That what we have together, it's more than enough. It's everything." As the sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home, not in a place, but in the heart of the quiet cowboy who had offered her shelter when she needed it most. From tears to joy, from emptiness to abundance, their journey together had only just begun. And in the years that followed through the trials and triumphs that life inevitably brought, Wade and Clara Bennett faced each day as they had faced that first one, together with the unshakable knowledge that what they shared between them would always be enough for whatever lay ahead.